Simon Says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
In this section of the course, we're going to shift our focus to talking about slicers and interactive elements. Now, slicers, if you're not familiar with them, are a visual way of formatting our data. And these filters can be a lot easier for people to use and understand. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now, I'm working with the pivot table and the pivot chart that we created in a previous lesson. Now, currently, I have a filter applied to this dataset. If I click the little filter icon just above, you can see that I'm only displaying the data for Burlington, Kensington, and Lux. Now, if I'm somebody looking at this chart for the first time, I might not realize that this filter has been applied, because it's not particularly obvious unless you're looking for it. Whereas with a slicer, it's extremely obvious what we need to use in order to filter our data. And slicers can be styled to fit in with any dashboards that you might have created, and can be a really effective way of quickly filtering data. So let's take a look at how a slicer works and how we insert one into a spreadsheet. So I'm going to click in my pivot table just here. And if we go up to the pivot table analyze ribbon, notice that we have a filter group, and one of the options we have is insert slicer. Now, the first thing you're going to see when you click on this is a list of all of the fields within your dataset. So these are effectively all of those column headings, and we can choose to insert one or more slicers depending on how we want to filter our data. So maybe I want a slicer that allows me to filter by country. Maybe I have another slicer that allows me to filter by region. Maybe I have another one that allows me to filter by product. So I'm just going to choose these three. Let's click on OK, and it's going to insert these slicers into the spreadsheet. Now, when you first insert these in, they do look kind of ugly. And again, they will be inserted based on the theme that you have in use in your spreadsheet. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that if we click on a slicer, we get a new ribbon at the top called Slicer. So this is where we can manage everything to do with our slicer, and we can do things like change the slicer style. So to get this more in keeping with my spreadsheet, I'm going to change these slicers to light green, slicer style, dark 3. So let's just apply that to all of these slicers. Now, notice with the product slicer, the top 3, Burlington, Kensington, and Lux, are showing in green, whereas the bottom 3 are showing in grey. And that's because we applied a filter to our pivot table just above. If I was to click the drop down just here and choose select all and click on OK, you see that not only does the chart update and it's now going off the actual axes because we modified the top part of the axes, but all of the products are now showing in the list, and I can use these to filter. Now, what I'm going to do before we continue any further is I'm just going to fix this chart, because this displays a really common problem. It might be that you've applied a filter to your pivot table above, and then you formatted your chart to be in keeping with that filter. As soon as you change that filter, you can start to have problems like we have down here. So I'm going to click on the vertical axes just here. Let's go over to axes options, and instead of 300,000, let's just put that back up to 800,000. We should find that the chart reorganizes itself. Now I can see I could actually afford to make that 700,000. And there we go. Now, my data labels don't really fit. Now I'm showing all of my data, so I'm actually going to remove data labels from this chart. Now, I can use these filters to filter the data that I'm seeing. So if we move them over slightly, maybe I'm just interested in seeing results for Brazil. I can click on Brazil in the filter, and it will automatically update the pivot table and the pivot chart. If I want to select multiple, so maybe I'm interested in Brazil, Japan, and the USA, I can hold down Control, select Japan, and select USA, and everything updates accordingly. So that's really all slicers are, a more visual way of filtering. If we want to clear our slicer, we have a clear filter button just here. We can click it, and it puts everything back again. Now, as I mentioned, currently these don't look particularly nice. I don't like the hover over color here. I don't like the font in use, and they just look a little bit awkward and ugly in the spreadsheet. In general, I wouldn't send a spreadsheet to somebody which has slicers that look like this. But there are lots of things we can do to change the way our filters look, to change the way our slicers look. So as we've already seen, we can change the slicer style, but we can also create our own slicer style. And we're going to take a look at that in the next lesson. Now, a lot of the time, what people will do with slicers is that they'll create them and then they'll add them to the dashboard that they're creating. So I could grab all of these slicers. Let's hold down Shift to select them all. I'm going to do Control X to cut them. I'm going to go across to my dashboard, Control V to paste those in, because I want to use these slicers to control the charts that I have on my dashboard. And you can see at the moment, there they are, looking a little bit ugly, but that is going to change very soon. A couple of other things you need to know about the actual slicer is you saw how we can select multiple by holding down Control, but you can also click this button just here called Multi-Select. If we select this, it then allows us to select various different countries, and you can see that the chart is updating. And just as a final thing, once again, I'm just going to remove data labels from this chart because now we're displaying all of the data. They don't fit in too well. I'm also going to go in and I'm going to apply outlines to each of these sections. So this is because we applied a filter and then we formatted our chart. Now in the next lesson, we're going to see how we can really jazz these up and make them look not only a lot nicer, but like they're part of this dashboard. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can add slicers to our workbook. For example, I could select a few countries from the slicer. So let's go for Brazil, India, and Japan. And then I could choose to display the sales for different products in those regions. Let's go for Burlington, Lux, and Vermont. And I'm just holding down the Control key to select multiple. And you can see that the chart updates. We can click Clear Filter to get rid of these. Now, currently, these slicers look very awkward and not very integrated into the worksheet. So let's change that by applying some formatting. Now, as I mentioned, you can click on a slicer, go to the slicer ribbon, and we have different slicer styles. Now, these are, again, just going to be based on the theme that you're using in Excel. But if you want to really customize your slicer, you can create a new slicer style. Alternatively, you can duplicate one of the existing slicer styles and modify that. So let's do that. I'm going to duplicate this green. I'm going to right click, choose duplicate. And now I'm basically creating my own slicer style, but using this color scheme as a base. So I'm going to call this my initials slicer style, and then we can go through, much like we did with our pivot table style, and change different elements. So with whole slicer selected, I'm going to say that I want to remove the outside border. So we're going to go to border and we're going to say none. I'm also going to go to fill, and unfortunately you can't set the fill to a transparent color. Even though we have no color selected, it will just be white, but we can change it to the exact same color as the background, which I think was this color just here. Let's go to the header this time, because I can see in the preview that the text of the header isn't going to stand out very much because the text is black. So let's click on header, go to format, and I'm going to change the font color to, let's go for white, and click on OK. We can then go through and choose how we want our slicer buttons to be displayed. So selected item with data, how do we want that to look? Well, currently that's going to show in green. That's fine. Selected item with no data, we can go in and we can change that to a different color. So make that a slightly different color green. Let's go for OK. Unselected item with no data, let's go to format. And I can change that to something else. So let's go for a dark gray and let's change the font of that to white. Now, I don't know if these are going to look particularly good, but I just want you to get the idea as to what changes when you modify these. Now, hovered selected item with data, if we go to format just here and check out the fill, you can see that that is that horrible gold color, which I didn't really like. So I'm going to make this, let's make this another green color, click on OK. And you can carry on going through. Now I'm just going to click on OK to see what this looks like. So now we need to go up and we need to apply our custom slicer style. And you can see what that does. Now if I hover over, instead of getting that gold color, I'm getting that nice light green. So in general, this looks a lot better because everything looks a bit more integrated. Now, I'm not really happy with the way that this darker green looks against the background. It's a little bit difficult to read. I'm going to make these slightly lighter. So I'm going to go up to my slicer style and we're going to modify it. So we're going to say selected item with data. Let's go to format and let's change the color to a lighter green. And then with that, I'm going to change the font color to a dark gray. Click on OK. OK again, and now you can see that that stands out a little bit more. So you can really modify these so that they suit exactly what you're looking for. And if you want to apply that to all of these slicers, you need to select the next slicer, and then you can simply apply your custom formatted slicer. Now, I'm not going to go through all the options that you can use to modify these, but hopefully you get the idea. I'm a lot happier with how these look. Now, another thing we can do is we can change the layout. So if I wanted these to run horizontally, instead of vertically, I could do that. So let's select the country slicer, go to the slicer tab, and then in the buttons group where we have columns, I could take that up to 5. And now I can drag this out. Let's move it down so you can see. And I now have that slicer running horizontally as opposed to vertically. I'm just going to carry on resizing this until I get it as I'd like it. Now, let's move some of these slices out the way so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to adjust the bottom of this to bring it up, and then I could place this maybe above or at the top just here. So I'm going to move my chart and the shape down just by using my arrow keys so that I've got a bit of room for these slices. And I can then move these into position at the top here, and we can use them to filter the charts below. So I'm going to do something similar with product. Let's go to slicer. I'm going to take this up so that we have them all in one row. Drag this out until I get it as I want it. Bring it up, and then we can move these across. And the final one, let's take that up to 4, and we can drag this out and pull it up. Now, if you don't like the horizontal format, you definitely can have them vertical and have them running down in column A, for example, but these can look pretty effective to have them running across the top. Now, a couple of other things you could do to make these look a lot cleaner is you could actually remove this heading area. So where we have country, product, region, we could get rid of that. So if I click on the first slicer, go up to the slicer ribbon, notice in the first group we have slicer settings. And this is where we can make those modifications. So you can see here, I can choose not to display the header. I could also choose to hide items with no data. So I'm going to choose that. Let's click on OK, and you can see the effect that that has. We now have a much cleaner looking slicer. So I'm going to do exactly the same for these other two slicers. Let's not display the header. Let's hide items with no data, and then I can resize that. And the final one just here, let's not display the header and hide items. Now you might be thinking, well, why would I want to do that? Because I can't see what these control. Well, a lot of people will do this if they want to add in their own headings, which are a lot more stylized than the default slicer headings. So we could at this point go to insert and add something like a text box and say country, for example. And then I can style this exactly as I want. So I can say no fill. I'm going to remove the outline. I'm going to go to home. Let's make the font. Let's make it a different color, shall we? Have a bit of contrast. Let's have a bright pink font. Let's make it bold. I'm going to make it a lot bigger. Drag that in, and then I can put that above the slicer. So the point I'm really trying to illustrate here is why you might want to remove those and create your own. Now, something you can also do with these slicer styles is you can change the font that you're using. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to modify my slicer style. I'm going to say whole slicer. Let's click on format. And if we go to the font tab, I can choose the font that I want to use. So I'm going to say that I want to use Aptos Display. Let's click on OK. OK again, and you can see that that font changes for all of the slicers that this style is applied for. Now, I've actually decided that I didn't like that pink, so I've just gone in and changed the color of those heading labels. And now we can use these as we always would, and you can see the slicer style update. So check out this nice effect. We kind of have an outline style for items that haven't been selected. Now you might also be thinking to yourself, well, if I remove that heading, then I can't clear the filter. Well, in that case, you would need to right-click on the slicer and you can choose Clear Filter from Country just there. If you wanted to make this really easy for people and you really didn't want to display those headers, you could create a little macro and add a button that just says Clear Filter, which will do the same job. Again, that's something that we're going to cover in the Advanced Excel course. But those are some of the techniques that you can use to modify the way that your slicers look, create your own slicer style, remove the headings and other information to make the slicers look a lot cleaner, and also add your own titles. In the previous couple of lessons, we've seen how we can insert and format slicers. But did you know that there is another type of slicer that you can insert? And that's called a timeline slicer. And timeline slicers are specifically there to filter information by date. So the first thing you need to be made aware of is that in order to use a timeline slicer, you need to have a date column in your spreadsheet. And you can see here, I do have one. I also have a month name column and a year. If we go back to our dashboard, click in our pivot chart and go to Pivot Chart Analyze, in the filter group, notice we have Insert Timeline. And you can see by the screen tip, it says use a timeline to filter dates interactively. So if we click on Insert Timeline, you can see that it only picks out the column that's formatted as a date. So if you click this and you don't have any field showing in here, but you know that you have dates in your original source data, just go back to that source data and make sure that that column is formatted correctly. It should be formatted as a short date format or a long date format. So I'm going to select date. Let's click on OK, and it inserts a timeline slicer. And we can drag this out to resize it. This is something else that we could have running across the top of our dashboard or our spreadsheet. And what it basically does is it picks up all of the dates that you have in your source data. So for me, I have data for 2022 and 2023, and we can see all of the months. And if I want to use this filter, for example, if I'm only interested in seeing results in the chart for the first 6 months of the year 2022, I can simply select those months in this timeline slicer, let go, and the chart is going to update. Now, in this case, I don't have any data for the first 6 months of 2022. Let's go to 2023. I can see I have a little bit of data there. I'm going to drag this out to August, and now I'm seeing those results reflected in here. Now, if you're wondering why, when I selected the first 6 months of 2022, I didn't get anything in the chart, well, let's go back and look at our source data. If I go to our date column and click the filter, I can see that in this column I have data for both of those years. But if I just take a look at the data for 2022, I can see that all of this data resides in the last few months of the year. So basically from September onwards. So when I'm back at my dashboard, if I'm selecting January to June, there is no data. But if I selected September to December of 2022, where we do have data, that's going to update. So just be aware of that in case you think your results are a little bit strange. Now with timeline slicers, again, we have a clear filter button over on the right hand side, which will just reset everything back. We also have similar formatting options. So if we go up to the timeline ribbon, notice we have some timeline styles. So I could choose this one so that it matches a bit more with the color scheme in my workbook. I can also modify what I'm seeing in this timeline slicer. Currently, I'm showing everything by month. But if I click the drop down, I could choose to only show years in the slicer. Now, I only have 2 years, which are 2022 and 2023. I could show the quarters. I could show the months. I could even go as far as displaying things in days. So if I'm just interested in looking at data for specific days, I could do that and use this filter. So maybe for the first 7 days of August, and the chart is going to update. Click clear to clear that filter again. Now I'm going to switch this filter back to months, because what I could do is create my own timeline style, much like we did for the filters above. So if you don't like the way that this looks and you want it to look a little bit more like these 3 slicers, you can right click and duplicate the slicer style and make your modifications, or you can create a new timeline slicer style from scratch. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to say duplicate because I never like to modify the original. And this time we're going to call this DA timeline. Now I'm not going to do too many customizations here. I'm just going to do a couple of things to make it blend in a bit more with the background. So let's select whole timeline and click on format. And we're going to say fill, and I think this is my background color. No, it's one lighter is my background color. That's what we're going to fill it with. And we're also going to change the font. We're going to make that white. Click on OK, OK again, and now I can go in and apply my custom slicer style. Now I can see here that there are some modifications that I need to make. So let's right click and go to modify. I'm going to choose header. Now currently the header shows as date. I want to change this to a white font color. So let's click on format. Let's go to font and let's change it to white. Click on OK. Selection label. I'm going to format these and I'm going to make those white as well. Click on OK. And I'm basically going to make all of the text in here, and it is a bit of a pain because you have to go through each element. I'm going to make all of the text white. So all of these labels are going to be white so that they don't blend in with the background. Like so. Now I can also see that I've got a border around the outside, so let's get rid of that. Once again, we're going to right click and we're going to modify the style. I'm going to say whole timeline and format, and when we go to border, we can choose none. Click on OK. Click on OK again, and the border around the outside is gone. And if you wanted to remove these headers, we have exactly the same options that we did for the slicers. But this time, instead of having timeline settings over on the left-hand side, if you go over to the right where we have show, this is where we can choose what we want to show in our timeline. So if I don't want to show the header, I can remove it. If I don't want to show the selection label, I can get rid of that. And you can see as I toggle it, what that looks like. So let's get rid of that. I can even choose to get rid of the scroll bar. Now, I don't want to do that because I want to be able to scroll across the months. And I can also get rid of the time levels. So that's this little drop down, which will prevent people from changing it or toggling between these different options. So let's get rid of that as well. So now we have a much cleaner looking timeline slicer. And again, this is one of those things that you can move into position. You can put it above your chart. You can put it to the side. You can put it wherever you want to put it. I'm just going to put mine here simply because I have other slicers above. And I'll leave it up to you to decide how you want to design these and what your layout is going to be. And just to finish up, I've done a little bit of rearranging off camera so you can see how I might choose to pull this together. So I've changed my slicers and I moved them to be down the side, and we now have the timeline running across the top, and everything controls this chart below. So hopefully you can start to see how everything pulls together really nicely. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at inserting more charts and how we can get these filters and these slicers to control different aspects of different charts. In the previous few lessons, we've seen how we can filter data by adding slicers and timeline slicers. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can connect our slicers to our pivot charts. Now, if you take a look at the dashboard just here, notice that I've added another shape to the right-hand side in preparation for another chart. Also notice that if I was to use any of these slicers, currently they're only going to update the information that we're seeing in this first chart. So if I was to select Asia and North America and South America, you can see that this chart updates. Now I'm going to right click and clear the filter from the region to put everything back to how it was. Now what happens if we want to add another chart? Well, if the chart is going to be based off of the same data set, a really nice way of doing this is to simply duplicate the worksheet. So that's the worksheet that contains the pivot table and the chart that we copied across to the dashboard. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to grab the worksheet that says PVT_sales and just drag it to the right. When I let go, it's going to create an exact copy. So now what I can do is I can simply rearrange my pivot table fields and then change the chart if I want to. So let's click in the pivot table, up to Pivot Table Analyze, and let's open up our field list. Now this time I'm going to get rid of region out of rows, and I'm going to move product from columns to rows, and we're going to keep it on sum of units sold. So I've rearranged my pivot table. I want to change the chart that I'm using. So to change a chart that already exists, you can simply click on the chart, go to Design, and you can choose Change Chart Type. So I'm going to have a donut chart this time. Let's select it, click on OK, and now we have that donut chart. Now I'm going to change the chart title because this is now units sold by product only. So let's just delete out that part. Now, of course, I could go through and start to make more formatting changes, but that's not the point of this lesson. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to copy this chart and I'm going to paste it onto my dashboard. Control C. Let's jump across to the dashboard, Control V to paste it in. And we're going to drag it over to this little shape that I already created. And let's just position this so that it looks nice. Now, one thing I am going to do here is I'm just going to change that background fill color and then the color of the text. So up to Format, let's go to Shape Fill, and that's the color that we want. We're then going to go to the Home tab and we're going to change all of the font to white so that we can see those labels. Now, something else that can always be a bit fun to do, particularly when you have a donut chart, is to put an icon in the center of the donut. So let's just quickly do that just for fun. Let's go up to Insert, let's click on Icons, and let's just search for money. There we go. I'm going to select this stack of coins. Let's click on Insert, and then I'm going to drag that over into the middle of the chart just to add a little bit of interest. And remember, we can change the color of these from the Graphics Format tab. We can go to Graphics Fill, and I'm just going to use a light green. So now that we have this chart in here, what you'll notice is that if I was to use any of these filters, it's going to change both charts. So you can see they both update as I start to select different things in the slices. Sometimes this isn't the behavior that's desired. You might want certain slices to just control specific charts instead of all of the slices controlling all of the charts. So it's important to know where to go to adjust your report connections. Now, one way to get there is to right-click on any slicer and notice we have a Report Connections button just here. Now, what this Report Connections button will do is it will show you the pivot charts that this particular slicer is connected to. Now, take a look at this. You can see that everything is called PVT sales. So this really highlights the importance of naming your pivot tables and pivot charts. So if we cancel out of here for a second, you can see that this one is still called PVT sales. So let's call this PVT units and hit enter. So now when we go back to the dashboard and right click and go into report connections, it's a little bit easier for us to tell the difference between the two because we now have PVT sales and PVT units. So for example, if I didn't want this particular slicer to control the units sold by product, the donut chart over here, I would simply deselect this checkbox. And now this particular slicer is only going to control the first chart. So let's click on OK. Now let's see if this works. If I choose Asia, you can see that the first chart changes, but the second chart doesn't. Now you would need to go through and do this for all of your slices. So once again, right click, go into Report Connections and choose which pivot tables you want this slicer to control. If you want all the slices to control all of the pivot tables, then that's absolutely fine. But if you see that one isn't moving when you're selecting things, it's always worth coming into here and checking to make sure that the slices are connected.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Sez IT.